evening, everyone. It's a pleasure and honor welcoming Professor Zaman Stanizai for a session on Who Are Muslims, the De-Qur'anisation and Politicization of Islam. Zaman Stanizai is a Professor of Mythological Studies at the Pacifica Graduate Institute in Santa Barbara, California, and he teaches political science at California State University, Dominguez Hills. He has a doctorate in political science from the University of Southern California in Los Angeles and a master's degree in linguistics from the University of Washington in Seattle. As a Fulbright scholar, he has worked in Indo-Iranian languages, and his post-doctoral studies have been in Islamic mysticism and depth and sacred psychology. You're welcome, Professor Zaman. You have up to 2 hours for this session, and you're welcome to conduct it however you like it. Over to you, sir.
Thank you for your kind invitation from across the globe. It's a real honor to be back in India, even though not in body, but in spirit. I'm with everyone there. I was invited to talk about Islam, and I generally don't like talking about issues that people have already talked about, because I'm sure they must have done a better job and there's no need for someone else to repeat. So in an attempt not to repeat myself and not to repeat others, I often look for topics that or even if we talk about the same issue, we can look at that issue from a different angle. So the title can be phrased as the De-Qur'anisation and Politicisation of Muslim identity. The key word here is the De-Qur'anisation, which is, I think, a word I created myself, not necessarily with any sense of pride, but with a sense of concern. And that is that the Muslim culture in general is taking distance from the Quran. There is a separation, and with every century and perhaps with every decade or even sooner, people redefine what Islam is, and as they make those attempts to redefine, the general trend is that because Quran is so established, it's so clearly there, they leave the Quran alone. They go to hadith, they go to all sorts of narratives of scholars and people who had lived 1,000 or more years ago, who do not relate to our reality, to our times, to our situation. But because most people don't know them, that makes it convenient for people to either deliberately distort their ideas so it will fit their political or social agenda for now, or religious agenda, or else they manipulate it. With Quran, this is not generally possible. Yes, you can interpret the Quran like any other text, but because the actual text is there, and it is in a way for many set in stone, that prevents the manipulation. And so they leave it where it is. And by leaving the Quran there, they create a distance between themselves and the Quran. They create distance between the present reality and the past reality. And I argue that the major contradiction is that if you believe that Quran is the last revelation and that there isn't another, then that Quran could not have been revealed to give commands and wisdom and knowledge only to the people in the 5th and 6th century. It had to have been forever, in the sense that it has to have an eternity of its own that matters in all times, not just in one time. But I'm sure you all are better familiar with the fact than I am that to most people, Islam is to return to the time of the Prophet. And I think that's a big mistake. If God intended for us to return to the time of the Prophet, God would have created us then. God did not create us in the time of the Prophet. We are all created in our own times. So therefore, we should not take distance from the Quran. We should understand it in its own term, but for every time, including for our own times. So therefore, the topic for today is how are certain concepts de-Qur'anized, in other words, reinterpreted to serve the whim and the wills of people, in subsequent generations. But oftentimes these are done through politicization, again, just to serve their concern. Let me start with a question. I'm sure you're much more awake than I am. I just got up because you guys have stolen the sun that we used to have here yesterday. I don't know what happened to it. If I ask you a question, to give me an approximate number as to the population of Muslims around the world, I'll make it easy for you. I'll give you a multiple choice question. And you don't even have to answer it right away. Just think about it. Is the population of the Muslim world today, in the 21st century, approximately 1.7 billion? That's choice A. Choice B is it approximately 300 million? C, is it about 4.5 billion with a B? Or is it 7.9 billion? The last one will be obviously choice D. I'm not sure if in India you use the word billion. So a billion is 100 million. I think some numbers, there's a different Indian version of it because the Indians feel privileged and entitled to renaming numbers because you guys created the most important one, 0. But I will give you more than a 0 for a score if you answer the question correctly. So just, I think Behzad is going to help me find out as an estimate. How many of you answered A, that is 1.5 billion? If you can raise your hands, and Behzad will give me a count, approximately.
Okay, I see 2 hands there, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Okay, was that 4 or 4.5 or a little bit more? Okay, 4. So 4 for A. How about for choice B, which was 300 million?
300.
For B? 300 million. The others could lower their hands so we don't count them twice. India is already overpopulated. We don't want an overcount. Okay, for B?
There's nobody for B.
Oh, that's terrible. You guys disappointed choice B. How about choice C? That's 4.5 billion.
1, 2.
Okay, 2.
3, 4 hands actually. Yeah.
Okay, and how about choice D, which will be 7.9 billion?
Nobody. Okay, when there's
Okay.
one.
So 4 people for choice A and 4 for C. That makes it A. So that makes
6 for A. 6
uh-huh.
for A, actually. Yeah.
Okay. So 6 for A and 4 for C, and that's 10. And we have how many?
2 for D.
The total number of students is what?
Total number is 26 at the moment.
So we have 16 who are the undecided. Well, that probably counts for India's neutrality, but it doesn't. It's not going to work here. But anyways, if you're not going to announce your choice, at least make a choice and keep it to yourself. We won't charge you an extra for that. So let's get on with the subject. Islam means surrender, and a Muslim is an entity, human or otherwise, that in harmony with its natural disposition surrenders to the totality of the paracosmic limitless field of energy. Let me repeat that so you can get a little more confused. Islam means surrender, and a Muslim is an entity, human or otherwise, that in harmony with its natural disposition surrenders to the totality of the paracosmic limitless field of energy. All bodies from celestial to subatomic that obey the laws of nature, such as gravity, velocity, etc., other laws of motions, these would be called Muslims. This interpretation is based on the Quran, Ayah 30, Surah 36, Ayah 32, Surah Yasin, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. We call this entity Allah, God, or whatever other name suits you. But more than the name, at least in the context of our discussion, it's the meaning, the conceptualization, and the understanding of that. The ayah I referenced implies that all entities in the universe are worshiping God. So the idea that God is that paracosmic totality is another definition for a phrase we use very casually and often as a slogan, and that is Allahu Akbar. Can anyone give me a definition for Allahu Akbar? I want to hear at least one. No, not everybody together. I can't hear everyone. Just one volunteer. Allahu Akbar means?
It means that Allah is great.
I think that's a mistake, but we'll take it for what it is right now. Allahu Akbar means God is greater, not great. Because when you say great, it is compared with the things that we know. But when you say it's greater, it's a comparative that no matter what comes to mind, God is greater than that. And the idea here is that God is beyond comparison. So we are talking about a relativity, that whatever comes to mind, God is greater than that. And the definition I give you, the totality of the paracosmic limitless field of energy. And I added the word energy there, not because I wanted to sound modernistic, but some of the clear attributes of God Almighty are Qadir and Qadir, the one that has the power and the one that empowers. Let me share another ayah with you, and this is from Surah Al-Hajj, 22, at Surah number 18. You can write down the numbers and reference them later. And here, the Quran is explaining it in a little different way than in Surah Yasin. Even though both of them uses the word yasjudun. Alam tara anna Allah yasjudu lahu man fis samawati wa man fil ard wa shams wa qamara wa nujumu wa jibalu wa shajara wa dawabu until the end. Most Muslims, when they read that, the Quran says that, the sun and the moon, they all prostrate before God. Some people try to visualize, how is the sun going to prostrate? Prostration is meaningful only in the context, at least for us humans, only in the context of the physical shape of the body. We bend down, we put our heads on the ground, in submission, in humility. This is the way we worship. And because we personify things, some people assume that, the trees also prostrate before God. Well, if a tree prostrate before God, the tree will be dead, because then it can't get up, right? So don't read these interpretations too literally. Prostration here, yasjud comes from sajada. Sajada comes from masjid, a derivative of rather than comes from. And masjid comes, what kind of word is it, linguistically speaking? It's an Avestan word, masjid, which is a word for worship. It has been Arabized. Quran has words from many other languages, either in their original form or in its Arabized form. So yes, we think of the word as Arabic, and we look at it with that interpretation, but it's more than that. The idea is that they worship. What is worship? Worship is in coming together towards a concept, an idea that finds a centrality. When we go to Hajj, we are circumambulating around a 0 point. That point has to be non-existent, because as soon as it finds a dimensionality, it also loses its centrality. The best circle is the one with an invisible circle, a center. Because if the center of a circle grows bigger, it approximates the circumference. And we don't want that, because we want as much distance between the circumference as we do between circumference and the center. What is the center? That is the divine. The circumference, that is us. And so we want as much distance as possible, yet we want to remain within enough of a distance so we can be defined as the circumference. Otherwise, there's going to be no circle. There goes geometry. I'm sure yours is better than mine, but let's continue. So if all celestial bodies worship God, what do we call them? The Quran says we call them Muslims, because Muslim means surrender. Surrender means that you accept a force towards which you gravitate by a natural disposition and by necessity. So then if you count all the celestial bodies and every entity in the cosmic reality, whether it is celestial, galactic, atomic, or subatomic, they all follow one thing. We define them by their motion. We define them because they are centered, they're swirling and whirling around some central point that is invisible. whether it's electrons and protons, they're whirling. Whether it's the solar system, our galaxy, and even bigger bodies, everything is defined by their motions. But the commonality is that those motions are around a certain point. So if you start there and you use the Quranic definition, then they surrender, so they are Muslim. Now, don't expect him to give you the confessional of faith, because again, that is human nature we impose on others. They're Muslim in their own way. And God is giving many other examples in the Quran through the different ayahs. What is an ayah? Ayah is often translated as a verse of the Quran. And again, I would differ because a verse has a syntactical, grammatical structure. If in most cases, it would have to have a kind of a subject, verb, subject, predicate, some kind of grammatical structure to it. A verse in the ayah, an ayah in the Quran is different because sometimes it could be a single letter. Sometimes it could be a sentence. Sometimes it could be a phrase. Sometimes it could be long sentences, like a whole paragraph. So an ayah in the Quran is not a grammatical unit that we often equate with either a verse or a sentence. An ayah in the Quran is a sign of a reality we are to understand. Whether that truth that a certain ayah presents can be explained in one sentence or in several, it doesn't matter. It's a sign of what? A sign of the truth that has to be acknowledged that it's there. It has to be understood that, well, not only is it there, but it's here too. In me, I got it. And it has to be analyzed. And so once we see what the truth is, once we understand it, then we have to become part of the truth, not the other way around. And in that context, we go back to our own discussion as to what kind of words we played with, we human beings, for messing it up. Because the Quran, the other reason for the verses, just for the sake of argument, the verses of the Quran are called ayahs, is because there are other ayahs too. If ayah means a sign, and those signs are the signs of the truth, then there are ayahs all over the world. And that's why the Quran refers to other ayahs, the written Quran, the one inside the pages of the book, refers to the ayahs that are on the pages of nature. The Quran talks about wal-layl, wad-duha, wash-shams, wal-qamar, and many of the surahs are named like that. So, spider, rain, clouds. So these are the signs in nature, and Quran calls those also ayahs. So therefore, for you to understand reality, it is not through the name of that reality in a verse, but through the observation of them in nature. And so in that sense, you will understand better what Muslim means when the Quran says that the stars and the skies and the heavens and the earth, and they're all Muslim. Don't go after the literal definition of sajda. They're not prostrating. They are obeying the laws of nature. Now, then when you ask people in our modern times, we are going back to the choices we made about how many Muslims there are in the world. Our narrow minds have reduced that definition, that oftentimes we never think of Jupiter and Saturn as being Muslim because they are circumambulating the sun. We're not even considering the trees and the mountains Muslim anymore. We reduce that not even all the people on earth are Muslim. So we call them kafir or mushrik or other terms that we have for them. Then when we bring that down to only those who followed Prophet Muhammad correctly or incorrectly, we reduce it to them. And then we go further. Sometimes the Sunnis don't consider the Shias Muslims, the Shias don't consider the Sunnis Muslim. And then sometimes people even reduce it to the inhabitants of a particular country, a particular nation, a linguistic group. So we keep trying to make Muslims so few that if that were the case, and if you consider all the definitions that the Quran had, then, God forbid if I can phrase this way, then we are simply saying that God made a mistake. Because no matter how greater God is than anything we can perceive, the only people who are the real true Muslim is just me and a few people around me that I know. The rest of the world, they have all lost it. Only I know. And so therefore, we reduce that totality, that general definition that the Quran had, we reduce that to only our own circle, and we feel more and more comfortable with a smaller circle. Like, if you live in India, only the Muslims in India, and then if you go through the different factions, the Ismailis, the Fivers, whatever categories you can find. Anyways, you get, I'm sure you got the point here. So if these are the Muslims, then what happens to the other groups? Well, the Quran mentions several terms. One is Muslimin, which means, of course, the submitters. By of course, I mean, I'm expecting you all to know that. The Quran also uses the word mu'minin, the believers. The Quran uses the word mushrik, the associators or the polytheists, kafir, the infidels or unbelievers, and the munafiq. So how do these categories generally work? From my understanding, the Quran was not throwing those words because it just liked to make the text longer, or just because the Arabic language provided a lot of synonyms, so they used it. I think that there was a reason for it. So if we have ayahs in the Quran, for instance, when it says, إِنَّ الْمُسْلِمِينَ وَالْمُسْلِمَاتِ وَالْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتِ. These were not stated because, again, like I said, because they like to express synonyms. They had to have had a meaning, a purpose. Verily, for all men and women who have surrendered themselves unto God, and all believing men and women. So we see it very different. That would be Surah Al-Ahzab, Ayah 34. For those of you who are taking notes. We also have a reference to Muslimat and Mu'minat. Again, the two words are stated separately. So we have many others. Again, Al-Ahzab 22 makes that reference. The Mu'min is stated separately than the Muslim, and that ayah ends in imanan wa tasliman. Okay. You look at other documents in addition to Quran, although our emphasis is on the Quran, but there's also one of the most, from the point of view of documentation, authenticity through documentation, is the Misaq Medina, which is the Constitution of Medina. There too, when Prophet Muhammad is signing agreements with the many tribes in Yathrib, the word Muslim and Mu'min are stated very clear. And again, not for the sake of repetition, repeating a synonymous word, but they must have served a purpose. And so when you look at it that way, we have to find out then who are the Muslims. My understanding, and I'm presenting this humbly because I'm still working on this thought. I'm still trying to analyze and try to get to a level where I'll be, close to 100% in agreement with myself. Is that at the time of the Prophet, we had circles for identifying people in terms of their belief system and how close they were or how far they were from what we call Islam today. There was a circle of, the closest circle would be those who followed Prophet Muhammad. They believed in the Quran, and they believed in a God that was described and defined in the Quran. So it is a Quran-centered definition of a people who would be considered the believer, because this is a belief system. You had to read a book, recite it, understanding, and understand it. These would be called mu'mineen, the ones who believed. Believed in what? In the Quran. So obviously everything that is in the Quran has to have centrality. That will be the central circle of this concentric set of circles. The second circle that will be bigger than this, these would be the Muslimin. These are people who have surrendered. Now, the surrender obviously does not contain the word believe. It may. In other words, a person who's a Muslim may also have surrendered, or may also have surrendered in terms of faith, in terms of religion, in terms of understanding this new religion. Or the person may have just surrendered militarily. The person may have surrendered not to rebel against the state in Medina. And so a Muslim may not necessarily also be a mu'min. And a mu'min, the word implies that the mu'min believes. And that is a matter of the heart and the mind and the reason, the rationality, the understanding. You believe something by understanding it. But the surrender simply means you accept a certain reality, whether that reality is physical reality, environmental, political, or otherwise. So who were the Muslims? According to not only the Quran, but also according to Misaq Medina, the Muslims are the monotheists who accept the oneness of God, but they may accept it in their own terms. They may not necessarily accept it based on the Quran. And the Quran, Surah Baqarah, the second chapter, I think it's verse 62, it might be 63. There, God Almighty says that those who accept God, that is monotheism, and the hereafter, that is the infinity of time, and have not harmed others, need not fear anything. So again, that distinction is made. So then the second circle will be the circle of the monotheists. The third circle is the circle beyond that. Those could be the kafirin, and they could be the mushrikeen, they could be the munafiqeen, and whoever else. That is the etc. Circle. Now, how do we know this? We know this because Quran persistently uses the word mu'minin or mu'minun, depending on the context, in reference to people who believe in the Quran. And for that reason, in those verses that uses the word mu'minin, the Quran gives matters of faith, instructions, or how to do certain things. For instance, in one ayah, it says, know then, O mankind, humankind, that there is no deity save God. And while there is yet time, ask forgiveness for thy sins and for the sins of others, for other believing men and women. So when you're talking about believe and about sin, this is more like instructional. You can talk only to the community of the faithful, not to everyone else, because it will be irrelevant for others. Or in the Surah Al-Buruj, again, it says, verily, as for those who persecute believing men and believing women, and thereafter do not repent, and the ayah continues till the end. Again, who were being persecuted at the time of the Prophet when this ayah would have been revealed in a social context? Obviously, the Muslims, because they were the minority. This was a new religion. People didn't accept them. We have another one in Surah Al-Mutma'inna. This would be ayah number 12. And here it says, O Prophet, whenever believing women and whenever believing men come unto thee to pledge their allegiance to thee. And the ayah continues till the end. So again, most of the ayahs that use the word mu'mineen, it addresses the community who believed in Prophet, who believed in the Quran, and who believed in this new religion. And just for as a matter of reference for the rest of you, there is also in Surah Ghafir, Surah 40, Ayah 40. That should be easy to remember. And here it says, there anyone who has done a bad deed will be requited with no more than the like thereof, whereas anyone, be it man or woman, who has done righteous deeds and is a believer withal, all such will enter paradise. So very descriptive, very detailed. Again, the word used is mu'minin. Also in Surah Medina 5, ayah number 6. Here it gives very detailed instructions. O you who attain to faith, when you're about to pray, wash your face, your hands and arms. And it gives all the other instructions as how to make wudu, for example. This is very detailed, but for people who believe in it. You can't talk to people who didn't believe in Quran to give them instruction. So let me stop. There are many more examples, and they will appear when and if this turns into a paper, if it does. But the idea here is that the mu'mineen were, according to the Quran, the mu'mineen are the ones who believed in the prophecy of Muhammad, may peace be upon him, and also in the Quran, and understood God in the context of the Quran. Now, then the Quran goes to the next category, we already talked about it, that there's also the Muslimun, or those who are the Muslimin. These are verses that are addressing the monotheists, that anyone who believes in God, and that's it. And let me make another distinction here. When a person is making, in today's world, when a person is making a confession of faith, let me retract that. Let me first define give you the examples of the Muslims. The Muslims, as I said, word is referred to those who are, for instance, in reference to many of the prophets. Anytime the Quran mentions Abraham, Jacob, Ismail, Sulaiman, any of these prophets, when they are mentioned, the word next to it often Muslims. Again, there are so many ayahs, and I'm going to just share a few here. Let's see if I can choose one at this point. Okay, Surah Baqarah, that's 2, verse number 133. Am kuntum shuhada idha hadara Yaqub al-maut. This talks about Jacob, and it says, nay, but you yourself, O children of Israel, bear witness that when death was approaching, and it continues till the end, and at the end it says, and it says, and God forgave thy forefathers Abraham and Ishmael and Isaac, the one God, and unto him we surrendered ourselves. So, أباؤك إبراهيم وإسماعيل وإسحاق إلها واحدا ونحن له مسلمون. So again, there's no instruction for teaching or anything. It's going back to the history. And in the history were all the prophets that came before Prophet Muhammad, and they are called Muslimun. We have another ayah. This would be again in ayah 136 of Surah Baqarah, pretty much the same thing. وَنَحْنُ لَهُ مُسْلِمُونَ. And again, it talks about Ibrahim, Ismail. Let me see if I can give you, I mean, there are many examples. The other one would be Surah Al-Imran, ayah number 84. And again, وَمَا أُوتِيَ مُوسَى وَعِيسَى وَالنَّبِيُّونَ, that is in plural. لَا نُفَرِّقُ بَيْنَ أَحَدٍ مِّنْهُمْ وَنَحْنُ لَهُ مُسْلِمُونَ. So again, they're all Muslims. So often when we say, so there are many more. Let me stop here in terms of the reference. So now we understand that the reason Quran uses Muslimin and Mu'minin differently, it's not because they're synonymous, because they are describing different communities. Now I'll bring you to that question I raised earlier. When we make a declaration of faith, a confessional, what is the confessional called? Can I get a little help from someone here? When you want to declare that you're a Muslim by today's definition, what do we say? It starts with the letter L. Yeah, go ahead. I think I have Fazl, Kaprian. You want to say, make the confession? Not that we don't believe you, but just that. I thought you were speaking because the light came up here. Anybody else for an extra 5 points?
Sir, may I say?
Yeah, please. Go ahead, Zishan, go ahead.
Yeah, it's La ilaha illallah Muhammadun Rasulullah.
So how many phrases are there?
It's, I think, I think there are two phrases.
Right. And
One is
what?
related to the Allah and one is related to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.
Thank you. And so what do we call that in Arabic? We call that shahadatain. And that is in the dual form. In other words, there are two concepts that are introduced. The first part, that there is no God but God, that has to do with Muslimin. You can worship God any way you want to. It doesn't say anything more. It says there's no God but God. In other words, there is only one God. So the first part has to do with monotheism, with the acceptance of the monotheists. But the second part, that has to do with the mu'mineen. So right there, you have Muslimin comes first, mu'mineen comes second. It gives you those two separate circles that I defined for you. And a lot of times we recite that, we read it, we say it plenty, but we don't pay attention to why the two together. Yes, they are complementary to one another. That part we understand, but they also have this different definition. So if it is in the confessional of the faith, that we have the separation of the Muslimin and the Mu'mineen. If it is in the Compact of Medina, which I didn't get into the details, these are all the agreements that resulted in formation of the state of Medina, if it's there. And if it's through the many verses in the Quran, and I told you why the words are used and what the context is. It clearly refers to the Muslimun as the community of the monotheists, accepting God in one form. Take the word form back. Yeah, as a one, absolute one entity. So in that case, if you count the number of Muslims around the world, then you can go back to the answer you gave to that first question. But before we go to the answer, why then do we in the 21st century believe otherwise? Why is our definition not matching that of the Quran? Why it's not matching that of the Sunnah of the Prophet? Because I give you one account of it, is because we are so self-centered. We are so much lost in our ego, in our nafsaniyah, that the most we can do is to appear as a good believer is to make the circle smaller and smaller and cast away everybody into an otherness. And this may have happened in one of the two ways. One, that it's possible it might be a gradual evolution, although the word evolution implies positive, and I think this development is negative. Even development sounds positive, but what can we do? So this might be just a change in the language. It might be a change in the attitude, or it might be a kind of indifference, or as we use the Arabic word ghafla, we did not pay attention. So in the course of time, we messed up on the definition. But it's also possible that this might have been a deliberate attempt by some people, for political reasons or otherwise, to do what? What has happened, the way the Quranic definition of Muslim and Mu'min is different today, is that we have made Muslims synonymous with the Mu'min. Who are the Mu'min? Those who believe in Prophet Muhammad and the message in the Quran and God. Then who is Muslim? Then you repeat the same thing. So Mu'min and Muslims become one. So then what happens to the monotheists? We're looking for every excuse to push them out of the circle. They are no longer Muslims. So if a Christian came to you and said, I'm a Muslim because your Quran says so, or if a person of Jewish tradition, Zoroastrian tradition, a Hindu, a shamanist, in principle, all of them believe in one God, in one entity, in one source. The manifestations might be different, but not too many people, based on my personal understanding, not too many people in the 21st century can logically, reasonably assume that if there is a power, a source of power, an entity that around which the totality of all these ayahs, these signs in the cosmic reality, whirl and swirl and circle around it, then they have to give it one center. We look into all the images we get from the space. When we see a galactic spiral, and nobody has said that, oh, this particular galactic spiral has two centers. It has to have one center. So in essence, then, whether you look at the physical or the metaphysical or the cosmic, the oneness becomes a logical necessity, the oneness of an entity. And then down on earth, we could say the same thing. Forget about the labels. In my belief, everyone on the face of earth is a Muslim because they believe that there is a one entity. Whether they believe it through scriptural sources, Quran, the Bible, the New or the Old Testament, or other books that scriptures that we have, or through things like I think there is a conference going on in Glasgow, Scotland right now. What are they talking about? That this is just one world, one environment. It's a home for all of us. It's one home, and we have to take care of it. And so that is the reality. Except that our ego got in the way, and our politics, and most probably from the time of the Umayyads. What was the main objective of the Umayyads? We are now going to the history of Islam. Their main objective was that the Persians had this great empire. The Romans have the Eastern Rome, Byzantium. They have a great empire. And we Arabs don't have anything like that. So we are going to have our own empire too. And yes, for convenience, they call it the Khilafah. But their main objective was to expand their military power east and west and all over. It scuttled all the efforts of what the Prophet established and what the righteous caliphs established. They were after establishing an empire. And what do you need for an empire? You need armies, and the armies need salary, food, weapons, in other words, finances. And these finances have to come from, we all know enough history, it has to come from people. And how do you get it from people? By taxing them. So how do you tax people? Well, you impose tax. Well, those who believed in the Quran and in the Prophet, they had an option of either paying to the charity as zakat, or a portion of their wealth, or just as a charity, sadaqah jariyah, or in some other form. They had the option to give it to whomever they wanted. It was those who did not believe in the Quran and in the Prophet, but who lived under a political system, who were under no obligation to pay zakat or sadaqah jariyah or other kind of charity, that then they had to give it to the government as a tax. That was called the jizya. So therefore, the Umayyads had every interest to have fewer believers in the Quran, because they wanted to expand their tax base. So out of that necessity, they took that designation of Muslims away from the Jews and Christians and others, And only the Mu'minun and the Muslimun concepts were combined. These were reserved only for us. And the others, forget it, they have to pay the taxes. And we also have to think about the usage of these two terms synonymous with another concept, the concept of ummah. Now, who is the ummah? Well, today, ummah is only the Muslim / the Mu'min. So the Mu'minun and Muslimun are the ummah, the others are not. So we separate it as, maybe the mushrikeen, the kafirin, and whatever. Whereas at the time of the Prophet, the word ummah was used for Muslims, for Mu'mins, for Jews, for believers in the Quran, for Ahl al-Kitab, all people who became part of the state of Medina. This was called the Ummah. It was much more inclusive. It was much more general. The Ummah of the time of the Prophet would be the equivalent of a citizen. It did not necessarily have to do with one's specific belief, but citizens will be, Ummah will be the equivalent of citizen. But today, we have taken that designation, and we have made the word Ummah, the word Muslim, and the word Mu'min, all three synonymous, and we define them religiously rather than religiously, socially, and politically, and otherwise. And I think this is a distortion, whether it was done on purpose or by accident, for political reason or otherwise. In other words, our definitions do not match the definitions in the Quran. And so this is the main argument I'm making. And I give you enough sources. And like I said, there are probably 3 times as many more ayahs in the Quran that I can explain. And there are places where both the Mu'mineen and the Muslimin are explained that I could share that with you. But in the interest of time, I will stop here. And I'm sure you don't have any questions for me. So that way, we can just stop altogether. But if you do, then please make sure to ask the easy ones so I can answer them and answer them to your satisfaction. So, Behzad, are you going to?
Yes, thank you, Professor Zaman, for this talk. Now, of course, we open the floor for questions and answers or any comments. Please raise your hands. Yes, Rajan. Rajan, please turn on your camera and then ask your question.
Thank you, sir. First of all, I want to pay thanks that you have delivered a wonderful lecture and try to decode as much as you could and explore the Quran very much easily for us. So my fundamental question is that recently I came from Nalanda University, where was the Dhamma conference. So I found that there was so much challenge in front of Abrahamic religion, including Islam. So I want to ask, like, how would Islam particularly deal with the opposite arguments of pantheism, polytheism, and atheist, and particularly the post-modern humanist? These are particular type of ideology or the question, those who question the Abrahamic religion. How would you try to inculcate their question? How can we basically deal with them? This is my one question. My second question is that, sir, like when we try to decode any particular text of any religion, whether it is Hinduism or Islam or Christianity or whatever, what is the reason that we always fail to decode them? Whether it was the God's high level of intellectual that he made that text so much stuff that no human being ever would be capable to decode them. What is the reason behind that? And my third question is that, like, what would you say on the term philosopher and Muslim? On the one hand, we say that philosopher is someone who is always critical, who is always question the things. While on the other hand, Muslim is someone who always has to show the faith, who is always has to, surrender to the God and so on. So do you find any dichotomy between a philosopher and a Muslim? These are three questions, sir.
Yeah, the first question that has to do with the definition. Remember when in the year 711, that's my favorite number in the history, two things happened in the year 711. Muslims went to India. They crossed the Arabian Sea. In the same year, Muslims went to Spain. They went to Europe. Europe and India are about the same size, regardless of whether they are called subcontinents or supercontinents. Now, when Muhammad bin Qasim, who was the commander of the Muslims who went to India, and he talked to the Hindus, he understood the principle that, wait, these people do believe in one super entity, in one God. It doesn't matter what they call it. So he wrote back to Damascus, this is under the Umayyads, and told them, look, the Quran is talking about Ahlul Kitab. The examples that Quran give is the Jews and the Christians and the Sabi'in, excuse me, and the Sabi'in. And in a few cases, they also include the Zoroastrians. But the Quran doesn't talk about the Hindus. So what do? Do we treat them as Muslimun, as monotheists, and not tax them? Or do we treat them as kafirun, those who deny the truth? And he explained their belief system. I'm sure it must have been pretty brief. And the response came is that it doesn't matter if it's not in the Quran. If they believe in one God, the mentioning of their name is not necessary. Treat them as Ahlul Kitab. So then the Muslimun will be the equivalent of the Ahlul Kitab, a term that I didn't refer to. And so we should not have any problem with it unless we politicize it. And when you use the word like, how do you deal with them? Why do I have to deal with anyone? God has given me and everyone else a different set of brain, a different head on their shoulders. And the Quran is repeatedly, probably the only verse that is repeated more than any other is وَلَا تُزِرُ وَازِرَةً وَزْرَ أُخْرَى. We have made you each accountable separately. Nobody carries the burden of another. In my conversation with people of other faith, I like the atheist more than many of the religious people. And I'll give you the reason. An atheist is thinking that if in a particular part of his or her faith, he or she has not reached a conclusion, that's not a problem. An atheist is thinking. I prefer someone who thinkingly, and that's a new word in English, okay, who thinkingly rejects God, than someone who worships God and believes in God but does not understand it. And this will take us to this next question, whether Muslims, believers and philosophers. Quran starts from the very beginning. The first few verses in Surah Baqarah mentions two things. It says, وَيُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ. This book is for those who believe in the unseen. What this means is that that the human senses are not necessarily the measure of the reality. The whole expanse of the cosmic reality that we know today is many, many times better than the time of the prophet or the earlier prophets. So we know better. And therefore, if we know better, we have to know that we have to decouple, we have to separate, we have to disconnect that the human perception, whether we see it or not, doesn't mean that the thing doesn't exist. Whether we hear it or not, it doesn't matter. Our senses are so limited, and that's why we use a microscope, a telescope, all kinds of scopes, hearing aids, all kinds of things to enhance them. That shows their deficiency. And so therefore, the Quran, in addition to this, I think at least 86 times is commanding people. Remember, this is a book, a scripture that was sent for people to have faith. And faith is in a person's heart. But it's at the same time encouraging people to think. And it says, in reference to the same ayah I referenced earlier, the eyes of the book and the eyes of the nature. إِنَّهُ آيَاتٌ لِقَوْمٍ يَعْقِلُونَ. These are signs for people who think. So faith comes later. You have to think. One of the great prophets that Quran mentions, his name is Abraham. What does Abraham mean? It comes from the root baraha, burhan, reasoning. Why? Because again, based on the Quran, when Abraham was looking for God, he didn't go to his father to teach him or to tell him what God was. That would have been a faith and religion that he would have inherited. He didn't want to inherit his father's religion. That's why he was different. He looked at the star and says, maybe that is what it is. And then when the star disappears, says, that's not. And then he saw the moon that was greater. Then he saw the sun that was brighter. And then he saw the sun sit down and said, sit down, right? Sit in the western horizon and said, no, anything that disappears cannot be God. So how he discovered God? Through reasoning, through burhan. And that's why from burhan you get Abraham. Those of you who are familiar with the Arabic language, the consonant, the major consonants are the same. So through and through, Quran is encouraging us to reason, to philosophize, because the very first emanation of God was what? God first emanated, mazhar, came into, say, for lack of a better term, into physical reality as aql, as the power of reason. That was the first emanation, aql kull. The totality of intellectual power was the first emanation of God, not in the human form or nature or trees or plants, no. It was the God emanated as a concept. That's why we call that qala, aql, the tying together, cause and effect, all of that. So yes, a philosopher is the best Muslim because that person is following the commands of the 86 commands of the Quran, which is telling us. I don't know how many times the Quran says, go pray. You can count those. Compare that to when the Quran says, reason, think, understand. And so most people think of a Muslim as someone who is a good abd, ibadah, the one who prays. Not so. A good Muslim is one who thinks, because it's in your thought that God exists. And God is telling you that God as an entity is beyond the human perception and beyond our understanding. Forget about understanding. You don't have to understand it. What matters is that you're on your way to a better understanding. If you understand God better than yesterday, than 5 minutes ago, you're on the right track. Don't even expect to understand God, because as I defined it to you earlier, God is greater, not great. If God is greater than any perception. We human beings don't have the senses. We don't have the capacity. We are way too insignificant, way too small. And so who are we to claim that I understand God? We acknowledge God. We know God is. We don't say we understand God. So, and for that reason, the important verb in the Arabic language is, it's a verb we don't write. It's a verb that doesn't have a shape or a form. It doesn't have letters. It doesn't have sound. Do you know the word who? I'm spelling it in Arabic. It's not the English. Yeah, it sounds like the English word who. Like when we say who, Allah, hu Allahu allazi la ilaha illa hu. How many times the word who is repeated? Who means God is. But the verb is in the present tense in Arabic is not written. The verb to be is written in the past and in the future. In the present, it's not written, it's understood. So when you say who is simply a pronoun. That means he or it in reference to God. So when you say he, it means he is, but the word is not in there. So we don't even have a verb for it in that sense. And so in that sense, the way you deal with other people is that their faith is none of your business. Because the minute you made it your business, you intervene between a God and the person who worships it. How he or she worships it is I'm sure you've heard the word Sirat al-Mustaqim, meaning what? The straight path. What is a straight path? Give it the mathematical or geometric definition. A straight path is a straight line between 2 points, A and B. And if it's not straight, it will be bent, crooked, whatever. It will be curved. So the straight path to God is the path between your heart and your mind. Between those 2 points, how much you understand God and how you feel toward it, don't allow anything to intervene there. If your father, your friend, someone else tells you, that is their definition. If you accept it, then your line is not straight. It was affected by someone. So don't tell anybody if they believe in God. Don't test them on that. Because by doing so, you make yourself the criteria. You create a shirk in them. You create an association. Their understanding based on what you have told them. And so, just to give a short answer to the long question, I will stop here. We'll go to the next question if there is.
Arukya?
So thank you for your presentation. I have 2 questions. The first is based on the term De-Qur'anisation. My understanding of De-Qur'anisation is to do away with the Quran to understand Muslims. Is it possible to understand Muslims by doing away with Quran? That's my first question. Second is about politicization of Muslim identity. My understanding of religions from the beginning till today, either the religions make use of politics or the politicians make use of religion to reach out to people. Can we do away with politics to give an identity to a religion? Thank you.
By using the word de-Qur'anisation, I do not mean that you do away with the Quran. The prefix there is that we have made the Quranic definition either irrelevant, or we have created a distance, or we have redefined it. So if we define a Muslim and a Mu'min today as the Quran defined it 1400 years ago, we would not be having this problem. Remember when I asked you the first question, how many Muslims there are? It's because we have really disrespected the Quran by fudging and playing with the words with very clear indications. So when you ask the average Muslim, what does it mean when the Quran says, quotes Abraham, that he says, I'm a Muslim? They say, oh yeah, he surrendered to God. Well, if Abraham surrenders to God and is considered a Muslim, then what's wrong with a Christian or a Jew who also surrenders to God, who should also be called a Muslim? Not only that, we have to say that he should. The Quran says so, and that's why I shared all those examples with you. So, excuse me. So the idea of the de-Qur'anisation is that it's these concepts that we have made irrelevant. And yes, like I agree with you, there is the politics of religion and the religion of politics, and they have intervened. And it's this politicization is responsible for it. I give you one probable cause of the Umayyad period. And for those of you who may question it, just think about it. In Central Asia, somewhere in North...
What is event-driven programming language? See, the event-driven programming language...
In Central Asia, somewhere in northern Afghanistan, or probably today's Tajikistan, in those areas, there were 20,000 Muslims, 20,000 inhabitants, who at the time of the Umayyad governor Abdullah, who was ruling either from Balkh or from Sultana, they were petitioning him to please accept, we want to become Muslims. And the governor would not accept it because that was all his tax basis. So he preferred the 20,000 people to pay taxes and jizya rather than to have the option to pay zakat and to whomever they wanted. They wanted them to pay to the government. And initially, they may not have been 20,000, but he wrote in a letter citing that number, that there are 20,000 people, what should I do? The letter arrived in Damascus at the time of the second Umar al-Sani, which was probably unexpected. He was probably writing it to the previous Umayyad Caliph. And the response was very, very blunt and very straightforward. Some of the words just out of courtesy, I will not use them here. And he said, the minute you get this letter, allow every single one of them to accept the faith, to become Muslims. And they can pay taxes. He probably didn't mention this part. I'm elaborating on that. And so there was this political effort in making sure you have a larger tax base and as fewer people who would be called Mu'min as possible. And so therefore, they used Mu'min, Muslim, and Ummah together synonymously, and they limited only to the people who followed the Quran, not those who followed Zoroastrianism or Judaism or other isms in the context of which they would have been monotheists, and the Quran term would have been correctly applied for it. So yeah, unfortunately we did that. So just to sum it up, de-Qur'anization does not mean doing away with the Quran. But if you take a Quranic concept and do away with it, That is as bad. Next question.
Zishan.
Thank you, Professor. It was it was very enlightening lecture. I just wanted to know that you mentioned about Shahada. So in Shahada, we are talking about the essential relationship between the two statements in which we are believing in the monotheism as well as that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is the felicitator of that, but of that ideology and thesis. So on this basis, doesn't it mean that Momini and being Muslim, these two become essential in nature, like essential, it is an essential relationship between them that cannot disseminate at any point of time?
First, the word we use, shahada, is not correct. It has to be shahadatain because it has those two parts of it. And again, that's another simplification that we have used, and we have missed a great point there. The second thing is that the Quran testifies to that. I give you the address. I think it's Ayah 62 of Surah Baqarah. And I read you one in here too, that God Almighty says, they have nothing to fear. When God says, if you believe in God and in the hereafter, and do not harm people, you have nothing to fear. So if the Quran clearly says they have nothing to fear, why do we have to create fear for them because we want to define it differently? And whether they mingle these communities together, of course they will mingle. Who was the Prophet living with? His first wife was a Christian. So he had two Christian wives. Okay, Maria Qibtiyya, the one who was sent from Egypt, and Khadija. Both of these were Christian. In fact, the very first Muslim, by our modern definition, the very first person who accepted Muhammad as a prophet of God was a Christian. That was Khadija. Who was the second person? Waraqa bin Nufal, her uncle. That is your second Christian. So these would, in my estimation, most probably be the Ibnite Christians of Arabia. We don't have time to get to that detail, but just for your reference, you can do that search. The Prophet had a Jewish wife. The Prophet had a Christian wife. The Prophet had Muslim wives. And so, of course, the community was all together. And it was meant to be, because Islam, as we know it, the Mohammedan Islam, came to end religious tribalism. And that's why most of the previous gods, or a recognition or understanding of gods, were in the context of a tribe, a nation, a particular people. And probably one of the problems the Jews have is they have blended their faith and their ethnic identity so much that they associate, that they don't separate it, that you have to be born to a Jewish mother in order to be considered Jewish. That's why fewer people convert to Judaism. That's why it remained isolated. And so most of the other religions were also, like I said, they were either ethnic, national, tribal, or something. The reason the word la ilaha illallah starts with law is that the significance of law is to get rid of that tribal identity that we give to God. That there is no tribal, there is no Hindu God or Muslim God or Christian God, that there is no other God except God, and this second God is not defined. And what is the word God? What is Allah? It's the only word in the Arabic language where the article has been infused with the noun. We're talking grammar here. So the word al, which is the definite article, has been infused the word law, nothingness. So Allah, you cannot, in Arabic language, you cannot say God. You have to say the God, because Allah means the God. It doesn't mean God. And what that means is that the oneness, as far as grammar goes, for a definite article, the oneness of God is inherent in the syntactical form of the word. And then we go to the semantic, the meaning part of it, which is the nothingness. Allah means the nothingness. Allah, which means what? It's unlike anything you can imagine. The Quran tells us that in several places. In other words, you separate God from everything else you understand. The minute you reduce it to your own understanding, to your own perception, to your own level of limited knowledge, you're making God smaller. And yet, when you're saying God is greater, but you're consistently making God smaller, there is a big contradiction there, isn't there? So if you really believe in Allahu Akbar, that God is greater, understand, God is greater than your understanding. Don't reduce God to your level of understanding, to your perception, through your cultural proclivities and all that. And so therefore, do the communities blend? Out of necessity. That's why I give you the example of the cosmic reality. Is there any star, let's say, a celestial body that does not spend around some point somewhere in this whole universe that we will never be able to see, no matter how powerful our telescopes are. We will never see enough. That's why we can never see the end of it. That's when the word God is greater makes more sense. Next question.
Furkan.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, Professor Zaman. I'm sorry that I couldn't make it in time, so I'm joining from one coffee shop. And sorry for the background voice. I had a question about the De-Qur'anisation and the. Sorry, I took a note. So let me check. Yeah, the question is, like you already mentioned, the politicization and the De-Qur'anisation of the Islam. I was always wondering about this Islamic states. You already mentioned how it started. Like Muslims said that we should also have an army. Like we should have that, and then it goes like their own army and the Byzantine. But like from the first years of Islamic tradition, the question is, do Muslims have to have a state? Because as I know, in the Quran, there is no open call to have an Islamic state, but to live the Islam in a way that God actually wants us to live. But in that time, Prophet Muhammad, when he came, there was no freedom of speech, freedom of religion, then he actually had a state. But now all the Muslims actually think that Muslim communities, they have to have a state. But maybe is it true that they have to have it, or like they think they have to have it? Like what is? Can you explain a bit difference between these two? If you understood me, my bad connection. I'm not sure if I'm audible enough.
No, I got your question.
Thank you very much. Sorry for the confusion.
No problem. I'll try to confuse you even more. So hold on. I have an article on the Cambridge University Open Engage website. It's called "How Islamic is an Islamic State." How Islamic is an Islamic State. If you Google search it, you probably find it, or you can go to the Cambridge University website and find it. In it, I argue that an Islamic state is un-Islamic. As you correctly pointed, there is no political sovereignty in the Quran. Not anywhere, not even a word. Unless, of course, the word is misconstrued, where the word hakimiyya, which would be sovereignty, is read as hakamiyya. And Quran does talk about hakamiyya, which is making justice between people. But hakimiyya does not exist in the Quran. Therefore, it's not a command of the Quran. It did not exist in the vocabulary of the Prophet. The Prophet changed the name of Yathrib to Medina. Medina means a civilization, and Medina means a republic. It was a pluralistic state, and for those who say that Medina was a Muslim state, then go back to the Quran and define who a Muslim is. And that's what the whole talk today is. That if you define Muslim correctly, then it did include all these other tribes. And then you go to Misaq Medina, which is the most authentic, well-documented, well-preserved document we have that we can rely on. There are several copies, and an important one is in the Topkapi Museum in Istanbul. It's with the seal of the Prophet, that same seal that the Daesh and ISIS uses for their horrible crimes they commit against humanity. That same seal is the seal of the Prophet. This seal is on the Misaq Medina. Okay, so the authentication or authentication of that document is not questioned. Some people even question the Quran, that certain ayahs are missing or things like that. So the Quran's authenticity is sometimes questioned by some people, but the authenticity of the Misaq Medina is not questioned. Okay, because that was written at the time of the Prophet, recorded, whereas Quran comes in the time of the third caliphate. There's a lapse of time there. But we'll leave that issue aside. The point is that neither in the Sunnah of the Prophet nor in any verse of the Quran is there any room for political sovereignty. Medina, in my opinion, was a secular, pluralistic state. People show sensitivity to the word secular. And here I'm using it secular as non-religious, because in that same constitution of Medina, it says that when there are matters of state and of civil order and of society, everybody follows the same order, the same law. Only in matters of faith, which be, let's say, worship, divorce, marriage, in those matters, those who were the mu'mineen followed the Quran. Those who were Jews followed the Torah. Those who were Christian followed. So that was religious pluralism, which is what secularism means. And it's in this context also that those who claim that that was that Medina was an Islamic state, what was the title that the Prophet, or more accurately, the caliphs followed? Why were they called Khalifa, Caliph, successor? Take Omar, for instance, the second caliph. He had two titles. One was Khalifa, which made him the head of that state. And so therefore he would have been responsible for the affairs of the Muslims, the Jews, the Christians, whoever was there. He was responsible for, so he was the caliph in that sense. But then there was a small community, a minority, an immigrant community, like many in our world today, who believed in Prophet Muhammad and in Quran, and they wanted to follow this path. And so Omar had to be kind of a representative, or at least a leader of that community too. So what was his second title? Amir al-Mu'mineen. His title wasn't Amir al-Muslimin. So you see the contradiction there? So if that was a Muslim state and he should have been called Amir al-Muslimin, but that was nobody's title. Nor Umar's, nor Ali's, nor Osman's, nor anyone's. They were called Amir al-Mu'mineen because they were leading the small community of the Mu'mineen. And as far as the Muslimin is concerned, people of different faiths, for that they were caliphs or khalifa. So there is nowhere, any place where either the Prophet or the caliphs were the head of a state that would be a Muslim state by modern definition. It could be a Muslim state by that day's definition. So for that day's definition, their title was Khalifa, because they had to follow the tradition of the Prophet. What was the Prophet's tradition? Respect every religion, every community in their own way. Do not impose religion on it, because the Quran clearly commands. Surah 2, Ayah 255 to 56. Read that carefully. So if the Quran gives you the clear command not to impose it, you think, and now I'm addressing the ISIS people, you think, what, God forgot? Didn't remember it? Or are you completing the Quran? It's like, God says, do not impose religion on people. And yet you come and you take your sword, you chop people's head unless they all become Muslim. So an Islamic state by any definition is not a Quranic definition. It is un-Islamic. And I have given plenty of, that paper is something like 34 pages long with some 60, 70 references, Quran and other references. Read it. I think we need that article in our time. We need it very badly. And not because I wrote it, because to me, of course, it's one of the best papers I wrote, but I think it's very essential because it can make people think and give people a different understanding. My argument with the Taliban in Afghanistan is the same thing, that the government that they've established, it cannot be Islamic by whatever definition. Why? Because a state that the Prophet created, the Prophet established, had to be based on two things. Like most Islamic laws, in any agreement, both parties have to consent. Like in marriage, for instance, right? So there is ijab and there is qabul in a marriage, right? So there's a give and take because there are two contracting parties, a man and a woman who come together and say we want to be married. So the two parties have to be represented. Similarly, in politics, if there is bay'ah, it comes after the raya. So you give the raya, you give the consent through vote, through election, through whatever process. And then comes the bay'ah. You can't do it one way. The Prophet himself did it, not only with the whole community, but with individuals. And there are accounts that say that when he was getting the raya, the bay'ah from the women, some women, according to the norms and the lore of that time, would not shake hands. And so the Prophet says, no problem. So they brought a dish of water, and the woman will put her hand on one side in the water, and the Prophet will put his hand on the other. And says, like, we shake hands, we agree that you give me your bay'ah because I accept your rai. I accept your consent, your willingness to live under this government, and I will deliver. I will give my promise. Rights and responsibilities, rights and duties. It has been throughout human history, and Prophet Muhammad started it. Now, if a party just like the Taliban, for example, or ISIS or someone, they just take a sword and say, like, we have been commanded. What? A new revelation came to you? Is there a new Quran? On what basis are you forcing people in contradiction to the Quranic command? On what basis are you imposing? Who gave you the authority? That authority does not exist in the Quran. Like I said, there is no political sovereignty. And I've explained it in very detail in the article, and I will repeat the title for everyone again, how Islamic is an Islamic state. And that question is a leading question. The idea is that it's not Islamic at all.
Can I?
Thank you, Professor. I have downloaded and shared the article with the students in our WhatsApp group. So hopefully everybody will read it. Furqan, we will come to, back to you again. Narim, first, you go ahead.
Thank you, sir, for allowing me to speak. So it's exactly not a question, but a request from my side, because I have been in these things, in the terms and all are very new to me, and Professor has enlightened us in a very good way. So, so my request is, Professor has mentioned about the 3 concentric circles, according to Prophet Muhammad. So I would like to know more about the 3 concentric circle. So could you please be more elaborative, and so that I have missed some points so that I can reconnect it.
Okay. The first circle would be that of the believers. And this started with one person, the Prophet himself, and then, of course, the few believers. And by the time he migrated from Mecca to Yathrib, according to some accounts, there were only 76 people, and according to another, there were 86. So regardless of that, it's a very small community. So think about it logically. These were immigrants. They were running for their life. They were, to the people of Yathrib, these were foreigners. You know, how, they're immigrants pouring into Europe, into India, into the United States. They come from Mexico, they come from... When immigrants go to another place, they are displaced people. They have the least amount of empowerment. They are not in any position to be dictating things to others. And so therefore, Muslims were a minority. Muslim by today's definition, Mu'minin by that time's definition. So the followers of Prophet Muhammad were a minority. They were such a minority that people didn't even want to marry them. Okay? That's why the ayah that comes allows for marrying up to 4 as an exception. It's because the people of Medina or Yathrib, they look down upon these immigrants. Okay, we are looking at it from a different angle. So when you look at this circle of small followers, who are not only small to begin with, but even people who joined them, many of them died in these wars that were imposed on them by the Quraysh, the Badr, the Uhud, all the other ones. So now you know what happens in wars. A lot of killing, of course, and a lot of men die, and that increases the population of women versus men. And so, I'm trying to make the point for the reason for up to 4 wives only as an exception, because at the end of that very ayat clearly says, but the best is 1. So Islam does not recommend polygamy. The rule is marry 1. The exceptions that were allowed in the circumstance, that's an exception. And you go to many societies, they take the rule as the exception and the exception as the rule. Now, the circles are that circle of immigrants that went from Mecca, that understood or at least followed the Quran. All of the Quran was not revealed, but whatever amount that they accepted the leadership of Prophet Muhammad. This would be the first circle. The deprived, the poor, the foreigners, the disadvantaged. Okay, that's one. The second circle is that, as I said, because Islam came to end tribal, religious tribalism. Therefore, the idea was that anyone who accepts God as just one God instead of many is a kind of an evolutionary process. That if there's one universe, one world, one, there has to be one God. So if you have realized, if you understood this reality, if you have realized it, then that's a higher level of awareness. So this is the second circle. And yes, there would have been people who would have either through literal interpretation of their belief system believed in more than one God, in more than one deity, or used the attributes as an entity. Which many do. In Islam, in Quran, Muslims are referring to the 99 names of God. Well, you go to many religions, they have the 99 gods. In other words, the attribute is given a personality in some religions. But for Muslims, that's probably one of the advantages we're sticking to. So yes, there might be people who might be animists, who might be polytheists and for whatever reason, that's their belief system. So they would be in that last circle, that they have not gotten the first realization. So they will be still thinking tribally. I don't know if that's clear enough. I hope it is.
Thank you, Professor.
Sure.
Thank you, Tuzi. Aga?
Am I audible, sir?
Yes, clear.
So I want to know how do you see the concept of Velayat-e Faqih, the foundation of Iranian revolution?
I say I wanted easy questions? Okay, that's a tough one. Here is my understanding. In the context of what we said earlier, the word Islam, the Quran said, and God has chosen Islam as a religion for you. We have to understand that is not today's Islam. That is the Islam of the time of the Prophet, the one that is concentrating on monotheism. That however you want to get to God, just make sure that you understand that there is one entity. For that reason, I don't believe that, in my opinion, that the interpretation that God has chosen Islam the way we understand it to be God's religion. For one, God doesn't have religion. God doesn't need religion. Religion is to reconnect with the past. If we say God needs to reconnect, that implies that God is disconnected. If God is disconnected, that's not much of a God, is it? God has to be in everything. And if God is in everything already existing, there is no need for it to reconnect. It's connected already. Number two, when we use religion, the idea is that it's a path, it's a way. That's why we use the word tariqa. That's why we use the word sharia. Most of these words means a path, a way to lead you somewhere. Remember, I talked about Sirat al-Mustaqim. So if what is a road or a path leading to? It takes you from point A to point B. Now, do you think God needs to go from point A to point B? Absolutely not, because if you say God needs to go to point B, that means there is no God in point B. It contradicts it, right? So if God is in point A and in point B and in any point in between at all time, God doesn't need to go anywhere because God is present in every entity, in every place, in every time. So if God is beyond space and beyond time, God does not need to move, to go. If God doesn't need to go, God doesn't need a way. a path or a religion. We humans need a religion. We can get to God. Some of us want to follow a gentleman by the name of Moses. Others follow Jesus. Others follow Muhammad. Others may follow Buddha. You can follow anyone, or, if you're good enough by yourself, don't follow anyone. Just go straight to God. And that straight path, as I told you before, it's between your heart and your mind. That's the shortest path. So I don't know if I answer your question, but my point is that God is everywhere. We don't have to label it. For linguistic necessity, for social contract, we do, but it's not necessary. The best worship, in my opinion, is in total silence. Because any concept that comes to mind, you don't dilute it with some sound and some words and some vocabulary, some sentence. What's wrong with silence? And that, to me, is a great sunnah also. Now, think about it. When Prophet Muhammad used to go, when he was not even a prophet, when Muhammad, the ordinary Meccan, used to go to the cave in Hira and stay there for 40 days and nights in the dark, and there wasn't even Quran, what was he doing? And to me, we have to say this to be a little careful about this. In my opinion, the first Kaaba is not Mecca. The first Kaaba is Hira. It's that dark cave where the light came. That's where the Quran was revealed. Kaaba is the second place which we turn to. And the Prophet Muhammad, the major work he did for humanity started long before there was Quran, long before there was a revelation. His first campaign was against the killing of the innocent girls, the newborn, that they didn't want girls, they wanted boys. That was his first campaign. The second campaign, against slavery. Remember, Bilal was freed? That's just as an example. The third campaign was against the gap between the rich and the poor. All of these happened long before there was any revelation. So Muhammad was a reformer. Prophet Muhammad, that came later. So don't forget your humanity. That comes first. And in that, whether you deal with a human being or a cat or a bird or a dog, or with a few coyotes I was talking to last night, they're all God's creation. We are together. And there were 3 coyotes. I think we used the word shagal or jackal also for them. They could have attacked me, but they didn't, and neither did I. So I was standing here, and they were standing across the street, and we had nice time together. To me, they were Muslim because they followed certain rules and laws of surrendering to the natural disposition that is in each one of them. For me to think like I'm a human being and I'm superior to this wild animal, that's relativism.
Okay, last question, Pragya.
Yeah, my question is related to what you just said, Professor, about treating animals also as living beings, or just like not harming them. In that context, I just want to know your opinion about the sacrifice of the Eid, which is where you sacrifice a 4-legged animal. So I just kind of want to know what does Quran actually sort of say? The original, not the De-Qur'anisation Quran, but what does it say?
Scholars divide Quran into, I'm sure you all know as students of Islamic religion, into mutashabihat and muhkamat. The mahkamat is the hukum, the clear commands that doesn't have any questions. So for instance, when it says fast, how much interpretation that needs. So you fast. Then when it says in which month, from what time, those are the details. But that command is clear. That's mahkamat. Mutashabihat are things that are where allegories are used, where examples are given, where demonstration through some kind of visual creation is explained in the Quran. So they themselves may not be true. Like, for instance, when Surah Nur, God says, God is the light of the heaven and earth. Allahu nuru samawati wal ard. Now, you don't look at the light and say, okay, God is like the light. It is like light. So when you see things around your environment, like right now, the sun is shining here. Finally, I'm going to turn off this light. So do I see the light? No. Do I see with the light? Yes. Okay, that's why this allegory. You see with the light, you do not see light itself. You see with the knowledge of God, and not the other way around. So I have come up with the third category, and in all humility, I think that Quran has something more in addition to mutashabihat and in addition to the mahkamat, and that is references. So Quran references stories from the past, stories from the time of Noah, stories from the time of, whether they were historical or not, it doesn't matter, because we can't reduce Quran to history. So you might say, oh, Noah was a Sumerian character, and he probably was. Maybe he didn't even live. It's not important. What matters is, what does Noah represent? And so therefore, when we go to the story of the sacrifice, the Arabic word is qurbani, is different than the sacrifice we understand today. Qurbani comes from the word qurb. Qurb means getting close to, approximation. Qurb means cutting distance between you and whatever other entity. Is the same word as salat. What does salat mean? To most of you, probably it means prayer. No, salat, it comes from the word wasala. Wasala means to connect. You reconnect with God. That is salat. That you clean and wash and pray and stand on the prayer rug facing the Kaaba. That's a different thing. I'm not speaking against that. You can do that, but understand it. That the only time salat matters is if you have really connected. If you stand before God and you're talking to God, you're communicating, you're dialoguing with God. You probably like the word dialogue there better. If you're dialoguing with God, then that is the real salat. You have connected. Look at the root of the word. I give you a definition of Abraham. To me, Abraham was a reason. It was Burhan, Abraham. And what was Ismail? Isma, the one who heard. Maybe he was historical, maybe he was not. But it was customary in Arabia, in that part of the world, that people did a sacrifice. They killed animals. And they usually refer to it as burned sacrifice. In other words, you kill an animal, then you cook the meat, the flesh, and eat it. Whatever purpose it served, it doesn't matter. But that was a customary thing. And when you read it in very detail in the Torah, it talks about that, the burned sacrifice. So now, Ismail, Now take Ismail and Abraham and the Qurbani and de-personify it. It is reason, okay? Forget about Abraham. It's reason that is telling the hearing. Ismail is hearing. Is reason that is telling the hearing, which means there is an internal dialogue. Do you hear yourself sometimes when you talk to yourself in silence? You're dialoguing, that's your prayer. So here is reason is talking to hearing. There is an internal dialogue of to do what? To get close to God, to do qurb. Qurb means getting close to. And this is the idea, how to get close to God. And qurb also, if you look at it in terms of sacrifice, is to remember that line between the heart and the mind I told you, the Surat al-Mustaqim. Do not allow anything to come between, because if it comes between, you will no longer have the straight connection. You will no longer have the Surat al-Mustaqim. You will have a curved connection, which is no longer. In order for a curved line to become shortened, it has to be straight. And when you make it straight, it becomes near. When you translate near into Arabic, it becomes qurb. And when you get the derivative from qurb, you get qurbani. So what is qurbani? Is to straighten the path to God. Now, you interpret it as a sacrifice. That means you sacrificed your ego. You sacrifice whatever else matters to you, because nothing should matter but God, right? So if anything has come between you, whether it's your wealth, your power, the flock of sheep you have, whatever, get rid of that. So when we talk about in Tasawwuf about sacrificing the self, the nafs, the idea here is that get your ego out of the way. Why? Because remember those 2 points, point A and point B? If point A matters to you more than point B, then you're in yourself. Okay? If you say, I want to go to God, but you haven't gotten there, so you're in yourself. But if you have reached God, then the self shouldn't matter. So point A should matter. Now, look at this in the cosmic reality. If you think you're the center of the universe, if you think you're so important, okay, you're so self-centered that the whole world, all reality churns around you. So where is God? God is either in the periphery, or God is irrelevant, or God just doesn't matter. All that matters is you. That is self-centeredness. That is egotism and egoism and all the different forms of Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, and other psychologists who would define it. But what Islam tells you is that you are not the center of anything. Point A is not important, it's point B that matters. So if you make God the center of the universe, and you're spinning around God in that whirling dervishish manner, then you're not important, are you? When is that a good feeling or a bad feeling? To not be important. That's the best feeling, but you have to know when to become nothing. You have to become nothing so God can become everything. When does that happen? When you're in love with someone. Remember, in any kind of relationship, you want to take from them. You want to get it. You want to have a friend because someday he or she might help you, because you're the center of gravity there. However, once you fall in love with someone, and I'm sure most of you had that experience, when you fall in love with someone, you are not important anymore. You like to give. You give your attention to that person. You give gift to that person. You just ignore yourself altogether. That's because you're love, and love is giving. And in loving, the more you honor, respect, admire, desire, want, hug, kiss, hold, live with that other entity, it shows your true love. Now, some of those might be more human attributes, but if we replace that other entity with God Almighty, when God becomes the center of your universe, just like you miss your beloved and you want to be close to it, you also want to get close to God. And what was the word for getting close to? That's qurb, that is qurbani. So for these people who, I mean, what does that poor sheep have done? I'm just as a matter of joke. Why do we kill those poor animals? I have never done it. I don't want to kill animals to get close to God. I use that as a reference. I use that as mutashabihat. And if I want to get close to God, I rather sacrifice myself, my ego. That will get me closer to God, rather than killing a goat or that is, if I can. Even if I can, I wouldn't. So to me, that's what qurbani is. But like in most other rituals and most other ways, the problem with the Muslim world is we take the Quran too literal and we interpret it too primitively. And so therefore, our Quran is not up to date. And I'm not talking about the scripture. I'm talking about the application. So we are applying Quran in ways that was symbolically recommended 14 centuries ago. We don't live in our own time. We should live in our time, because Quran has to be that kind of message that does not get old. If Quran gets old, they say, well, it just belonged to Muhammad and his time, forget it. It has nothing to do with us. But if it has something to do with us, then we have to apply it for our time, for our circumstances, for our problem. We have to solve our problems with it. And the problem with most of the Muslim world is you give them a problem in your daily life, they quote Ibn Taymiyyah for you. You say, well, who was Ibn Taymiyyah? Oh, he lived 1,000 years ago. What did he do? What was his life like? Oh, he said, okay, if you are traveling and the travel is the travel of the distance of 3 camel distance of 3 days and nights, etc., then you have to pray this much and that much, 2 rakats and 4 rakats. Forget about that stuff. You're sitting in the comfort of a jet that flies around the world. You have no inconvenience whatsoever to be worried about safety or about anything to miss your additional 2 rakat prayer. So I don't pray the prayer of people who travel, because the travel entailed lots of problems at the time. We don't have that. I don't have AM and PM anymore, especially now with the COVID and the Zoom world. Like right now, your PM is my AM, and it was the other way around earlier. And I got this beautiful son that I think came straight from India and sending me greetings from you too. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. There's just one little thing I just wanted to mention. The root of the word qurb, you said. We also have another word in Urdu called qurbat, which means intimacy or closeness. So, I mean, that I could just relate to that. Thank you.
Yeah, may God bestow upon you a lot of qurbat. Yes, that's a beautiful word. Yes, they are connected. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. Beautiful note to end our session on. Thank you, Professor, for waking up so early for us, at 5 a.m. your time, and taking time for us. Thank you all for your questions and comments. I will see you all tomorrow. And
that I woke up, you want to stop it? Yeah, no, thank you for the invitation. I wish I were in India, seeing you face to face, but under this present reality, it's good to make your acquaintance. And I hope there is a chance that we can meet face to face somewhere, wherever it might be. And thank you for your attention. I tried to confuse you, and I hope I have confused you enough so you start thinking for yourselves. Knowledge may come from others, but it does not belong to anyone. Make it yours by understanding it, by living it, by acting upon it, and hope that we can make this whole world much more peaceful, not for the 1.7 billion, but for the 7.9 billion. We are all Muslims in this together. We have to follow the Quranic verdict, not the political one. So I bid you peace and have a nice day, evening, and all the times that come in between.